Hey y'all, welcome back to Let's Be Bold. Come and do a puzzle with me today. I don't know about you guys, but puzzles help me think and process. And so we are going to do a little bit of processing today through this puzzle. Now, if you want to get a sneak peek on what this is going to look like at the end, I got this beautiful Maya Angelou puzzle with some of her quotes from speeches and poems. And this is going to help us through an episode that I am going to call Raising Resilience. So in life, right, we have a lot of hard things that come our way, and our brain doesn't necessarily like to work hard. However, having a challenge and experiencing failure is something that is beneficial for our brains, and it's definitely helpful for our own growth as well. And this week for me has been interesting because I have had a lot of things just not go my way, like was ghosted by a couple of guys that were supposed to take me out and they didn't. And I applied for a writing group to provide accountability for the book that I would love to work on more intentionally, and was not accepted into that space. And I was like, okay, this is cool. And I also learned that loan companies don't like the fact that I get paid per session, and that is something that is going to keep me from getting a house apparently. And so this week I was like, okay, this is cool. The universe has just decided to throw rocks at me. And I know that you all have probably experienced things like this. Side note, it's a little bit difficult to talk and do a puzzle at the same time. So this is this is an additional challenge that I've created for myself this week, talking to you guys about building resiliency. So bear with me. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the benefits of a challenge. So through the unfortunate events that have happened this week, and unfortunate isn't necessarily maybe the right word. I am not, a Baudelaire child. I don't know if you guys read a series of unfortunate events growing up or seen the show on Netflix, which is really good, by the way. However, challenges cause our brain to grow. Now, when I was a kid, and I don't think that my dad necessarily remembers this story, but I was always someone who picked up things fairly quickly, and I was a fast learner as a kid. However, at the age of about 3-ish, 4-ish, I did not know how to spell my middle name. Now, for a child at that age, right, we might not have the alphabet nailed down. We got A, B, C, D, E, maybe an F and a G up in there. But we don't necessarily have the end of the alphabet, the V's, the Q's, the U's, like the weird letters. And so I did not know how to spell my middle name. It's very neat, by the way. And so my dad, he had me write my middle name over and over again. And this was something that, does this go here? No, that's not go there. Okay. So this is something that created quite a bit of frustration in my young mind because I just couldn't get Veronique down. And so he would have me write over and over again Veronique, right, with a pencil, Veronique. And when I would write that 5 times, something like that, he would come back and he'd be like, okay, DeMonica, now spell Veronique. And I would come to him and I would go, VER, and then I would stop. And I just, what came after R? I don't know. So then he would have me write it 5 more times. Veronique. Now, repetition is one way to learn things, and it just took me a while because, that way of repeating things just did not work out for me as quickly as I think that my dad would have hoped. So, but eventually, as you can see, I now have learned how to spell my middle name. And, at 4 years old, I probably was one of the few kids who could spell my first, middle, and last name. It's a lot of letters. I say all that to say that repetition is one way that we can learn things, and it helps us to grow both in our minds and our bodies. Same way with going to the gym, right? Like, we start at a certain weight if we're lifting, and eventually our body adjusts to that weight, and then we gain more muscle. Now, repetition is not the only way that we can learn things, right? A lot of us are people that learn from experience, and adulthood is all about learning from experience, because let me tell you, we did not learn how to do things like apply for a loan in school, although that's something that would have been helpful. Or, learn things about engaging in the system as a whole as high school students. And a lot of us have just had to learn as we go, even on things like dating apps, which, online dating wasn't necessarily as popular as it is now when I was in high school. And so a lot of it is learning by experience, learning what questions to ask, learning what your type is just by texting conversations, because not everyone is quick to go on a date, and which those people aren't necessarily for me anyway. But these are things that we have to learn by experience, right? And as we engage in these hard things, there are like 2 approaches that we can really take to them, right? So we can choose to take things personally and say negative statements like, oh, I must really be a failure, or I'm not really good at this. What's the point of keeping trying because things just don't work out for me, or the universe is out to get me, or things like that. Or we can take a different approach and use each setback as opportunities for growth. And so something that I have been trying to practice more and engage more around is taking responsibility for everything that happens in my life, right? And I recognize that taking responsibility does not necessarily mean that I am at fault for everything that happens in my life. So for example, back in 2020, I was in a car accident. I was rear-ended from behind, and I'm minding my business, sitting at a red light, and the car behind me, which I learned through our conversations that we had with each other after he rear-ended me, was he was looking at the lane to his left because he thought that he saw somebody that he knew. and recognized that the left lane was moving, which the left lane tend to move first because that is where our green arrows are for people who are making left turns. And so his assumption was, oh, all of traffic is moving, and so I'm going to go too, but we were still stopped. And so that was unfortunate because it ended up my car got totaled and then I had to get a new car. So anyway, obviously that was not my fault. I'm minding my own business, listening to the radio, just trying to get to, I was on my way to a client. So this was considered like a work-related incident. And that situation wasn't my fault. However, I still had to take responsibility for it, right? I got in touch with my insurance company, got in touch with his insurance company. My car was totaled out, and so working with my insurance company for them to essentially do the things like, they buy back the car or whatever it was so that I can get the money that I needed to then buy a new car, right? So I could have sat and moped about that, which I'm sure I did, right? Like my red Altima was a car that I was like, yes, this car is going to take me through the rest of my 20s. And unfortunately, it did not. But I have a new whip that I ride around in now. And I created action steps so that I was not carless after that incident. And so that is just one example of what taking responsibility can look like, right? And so in the events that happened this week, right, I didn't get accepted into this writing group to work in a community on my novel and get feedback from peers. I can take that as, okay, like maybe they didn't think that my writing sample was good enough, or maybe they didn't think that I was far along in my own work to be able to take criticism from people. There wasn't enough material there for them to reflect on. So I could, settle with all of these excuses of, why I didn't necessarily make it into that writer group. Or I can be like, you know what? I can create my own systems of accountability within myself, set a goal of doing something like 200 words per day until I get where I'm trying to go. And I also can ask my friends for accountability in the same way and still engage in a hobby. Or I could take the opportunity to continue to work on this goal that I have for myself. Taking responsibility is a very intentional practice and is something that it might be helpful to map out every day what that looks like. And this is some part of why journaling is so helpful, right? Because we can be reflective on how our days have gone, and we can be mindful of the steps that we can take to not always take the position of being a victim. Now, that is not to say that, we aren't a product of the things that happen to us, right? And I definitely want to be mindful of something that happens sometimes when we actually are victims of victim erasure. What I am saying is, however, we can't let the past necessarily define us just because, we aren't at fault for those events. That is a part of how depression takes a hold of us. It keeps us living in the past. It keeps us living in the if only, and this is what I wish could have gone differently, and it prevents us from living in the present and taking steps towards our future. And so I want to encourage you guys to name ways that you can take responsibility for things that happen in your everyday. just one step at a time, right? One day at a time, one event and moment at a time. We get to choose how we respond to situations, and we get to choose our next steps, even if we didn't get to choose the steps that happened before us. And so that is my challenge for you this week. And this is something that is going to be helpful in raising resilience.